Tonight on Newsgang, so close yet so far, the National Assembly yet again grapples with the gender bill to actualize provisions of Article 81 of the Constitution that requires either gender not to occupy more than 2/3 of elective and appointive public offices. The vicious debate in and out of Parliament, battle lines clearly drawn and hardline stances, despite the country's top political players, President Uhuru Kenyatta, his deputy William Ruto, Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka marshalling their troops in the August House to support the gender bill. But why can't the MPs just agree? What are the contentious issues? Is there a win-win formula? The gender bill proposes crafting of party lists that would be used to top up the numbers if the Kenyan electorate at the ballot failed to elect the requisite number of women or men to parliament. But even then, this is a proposal that has a sunset period of 20 years and will be implemented from the 2022 general election if the gender bill becomes law. But will it? Well, some of the debates in the August House were not so interesting, and here is just a bit of it.
I know for a fact that women suffer in the hands of our party leaders, the chairman of the parties, the secretary generals of the parties. And I know for a fact, the speaker, and I have evidence that there is a secretary general of a party who nominated himself, his mother-in-law, and his second wife.
It is for the slave queens to slay their way into the National Assembly, to massage their way into the Senate, and slay their way into County Assembly. Honorable Speaker, then I do have some reservation.
When I hear members talking about slay queens, I would like to ask nominee number 001, now that he's a nominated member, can he tell this House whether he's a slay king? And which favors did he give to his political party to nominate him?
And we elect 50 next time, the numbers to top up will actually go down.
That several of us who have come this way were first nominated. So yes, I have been elected twice, but I was elected twice having first been nominated as a member of parliament.
Joe, of slay queens and slay kings. Yet the Constitution requires the implementation of this provision. But why can't they just agree? I thought it was a simple matter.
Yes, you know, it seems to me that the late Kajwang talked about passionometer. I think right now we might need slay queenometer and slay kingometer if there are things like that. But I think that the gender question is complicated. I mean, it is all easy to say, well, this is a constitutional requirement, let's go and implement it. But I think there are many issues at play. First of all, there are self-preservation issues that some MPs are dealing with. There are traditional perspectives that people have about women and gender relations and that sort of thing. But there are also practical questions, I think, that people have about how this is going to work. And some people are raising issues about the women who are currently there. Are they doing what they were supposed to do? And therefore, would more women necessarily mean gender issues will be better addressed? So I think if you look at it, that then it begins to explain why it has been so difficult, because otherwise just doing the math, it's not much. So I think there are many underlying issues that we have seen playing even on the floor of the House.
At least we don't need a law here. So let me ask Yvonne, because of those gender parity issues. Yeah. Yvonne, the question is how to implement, not whether to or why.
At least in the National Assembly. I know outside people are still debating about, women, and they should be able to fight for their space, out there during the elections. But it really is the how. There have been a number of proposals that have been put on the table that this should happen actually at the political parties level. And even that, as you would very well tell us, is fraught with a number of issues. Nominations processes in this country have never been seen to be fair, whether of men or of women. And I think also when you take a look at the registrar of political parties and the way they've been able to sort of whip political parties into doing what they should, not much has happened on that front. So is it at the political parties level? Is it at this other point? And I think that's also another thing that we don't understand, that what is being discussed here will be implemented in 2022 and beyond. How? In Parliament. Outside of Parliament, the debate is, do we need these women? Have they made an impact? Some of which have, very interesting proponents and opponents for it.
But Linus, what is democracy? Because it entails that go out there, elect a person of your choice. But here, the argument then is elect, but if you don't get the requisite number of women or men, then there will be a party list. And probably that's where the contention comes in.
I think, Francis, what we've seen in the last 1 week, unfortunately, is the context is being lost. This is a very small part of the discussion about the gender question. And when I talk about the context being lost, a lot has been gained in women empowerment from 1962, when Priscilla Bwao was the only woman who accompanied 5 men to Lancaster, to 1995, when Nyiva Mwendwa was the only cabinet minister, all the way to now, when we have 3 elected governors. One of them in a tough race between women, a race that did not have men. I think it's been unfortunate to see this debate being painted almost in desperate terms, that the women empowerment situation is desperate. It's not, and I'll illustrate to you in the following ways. The 2010 Constitution gave a lot of gains. Now we have things like equality in marriage assured in the Constitution, equality in employment, equality in access to education. All these are guaranteed by the 2010 Constitution. Matrimonial property, it's no longer the preserve of men, it's split down the middle. Women's rights to inheritance, to things like land, all that has been gained. So this is a very small proportion of the journey that women in this country are making. And I think it's the most difficult conversation because of the issue you point out. We're talking of elective positions. Not to forget to mention, for example, in the judiciary, the numbers are very, very good for women. They are close to 50%, the 50% threshold. So we need to actually recognize, first of all, that a lot has been achieved, even as we have this conversation about the 1/3 gender rule in elective positions.
Actually, that's where, Jamila, you need to come in, because there are arguments that the challenge is in implementing that aspect of elective.
Yes. Yeah.
Because appointive, one would argue it would be easy. But even then, the cabinet, the president would have probably led by example. Half of his cabinet, or even probably at least a third, should have been women. But you're still grappling with those numbers. Look at the commission, constitutional commissions. We still don't have the requisite numbers.
I don't know why we're grappling with that, because as Linus has said, women have come a long way in this journey. And ndazungumza Kiswahili sasa. Wanawake ni kama sio hatia wawezi. Wanaweza kutekeleza haya majukumu. Na wameonyesha, they've shown it in all the different capacities. Women who are leading parastatals and all these big organizations, public and private. So it should not be a problem. It's not something that should be grappled with. It should not be something that is a problem or causes all these concerns. It's not about ability. Women can lead. But it's also about making the environment conducive for women to be able to do this. We always say that over 50% of the voters in this country are women. So they should be voting for women. But that doesn't happen. You have a lot of issues, even cultural, that maybe hinders women getting an opportunity to be elected in some places. You may have a very capable woman, but maybe because of 1 or 2 things, they may not get a chance to lead. But it's not about capability. I think it's just we need to have the goodwill to be able to give women a chance to be able to lead.
But Joe, look, speaking to a number of members of parliament, especially in the National Assembly, they tell you what they are saying in camera, on camera or in public is very different from probably what is in their hearts and what they will do on Wednesday when the vote comes in. And the technical absence that denies the bill the numbers. So double speak, if you like.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there is a way these days that people vote against something by just not showing up, because, you know, when you show up, there will be the Hansard, and everybody knows, oh yeah, this is the person who voted for this and the other way. And it's an interesting way of expressing our perennial dishonesty in the country. But I think one of the questions that Linus touched on it, which I think is important in this question, is the wider perspective on gender, because I think that there is a sense in which we may have created the impression in this country that somehow implementing the 2/3 gender rule in parliament is the all and be all of the gender question. Yet there are many, many questions to be raised about the number of women, for example, in the leadership of the civil service and different boards, for example, in parastatals and that sort of thing, where someone might argue the impact of having those women would perhaps even be greater, because there's also a question, and I've heard some people talk about who gets nominated when we actually talk about nominating, even if it's 21 that we're talking about, or 41 in the past, and whatever number, that are these the women who really deserve to be nominated? Some of them might be middle-class, rich women who probably could go and contest and beat 10 men, you know, fair and square. And then the other thing about who gets the party leaders, for example, who have a very big voice. In a democratic state, that is likely to raise questions where people will be saying, why would some 2-3 men sit in a boardroom and decide, like, yeah, these are the 5 women that we need to have. And so at the end of the day, there are real questions that arise out of this. And perhaps it might be time to go back to that very law that we passed there, even if indeed we ever have a referendum. I suspect that it could be one of those issues that will be saying, hey, look, we passed this thing, but is this really the right way of approaching this, considering that people have to vote at the end of
Francis, I think those are the questions that make this conversation very difficult. Listen to the contributions on the floor of the House. It's about basics. They know each other.
Yes.
They know how they nominate each other to the House. And now they're saying, okay, now from 12 to 21 to maybe 30, how will these slots be shared? Like Joe pointed out, nominations in this country have been a big mess. A big mess, because it's about who your friends are. In the old days when we started out with Joe, because we started earlier.
I'm happy you acknowledge the generational gap.
What are you saying?
When we covered President Moi, nominations always went to very influential, sometimes business people, who have had a role, for example, in the election or the effort by
funding the party.
So the reward is, here it is. And that is
or doling out favor. You remember when Mark Too had to step out so that Uhuru Kenyatta could
for strategic reasons
into Parliament.
So merit was never an issue. And I think what we are hearing from some of the members of Parliament is, will it be about merit or will it be about slay queens? And we know very well from Justice Wakiaga now, we have male versions of slay queens.
Slay queens, exactly.
There's slay queens. But here's another perspective, Francis, because there was also another proposal. You'd asked about the how. About, say, taking, you know, the one who was the loser in the election.
Best losers.
The best losers. And that is something that is fraught with it. I mean, when we were talking with you earlier, you talked about how that would be also complicated to achieve. So it's not that we're short of proposals. It's just every proposal that seems to be put on the table has one issue or another. If you look at nominations within the party, that's another thing. If you look at the best losers, if you like to call them that, then that becomes something else, because then what happens when you have to start to make very hard choices?
Jamila, look, every election,
yes,
every political party is supposed to submit its list of candidates such that we will clearly know who is Party A's candidate in Karachuonyo or Party B's candidate in Mvita. But the nomination lists are normally a rather hidden agenda. And probably that's where we need to open it up a bit, such that by the time we go to an election, we know in the event that nominations are to be done for 20 or 25 or 40 or 45, we know exactly who will be nominated, who are the likely nominees.
It is true, actually, Francis. You say that the party lists are usually hidden. They're like, I don't know what to call it. In fact, they're supposed to be, it's a public document. You're supposed to know who is going to be the nominee of my party for Aina Moi, where I come from, my county in Kericho. But that doesn't happen. And I feel sometimes that the fickleness of some of our parties, during which are created a month or 2 or 3 or a year before elections, also sort of like inachangia swala hili.
Special purpose vehicles for elections.
Special purpose vehicles, because these are not parties that are roots, that have deep roots. They're not. They're just a vehicle for this particular election. And then come the next election, a year or 2, we form another one. So there isn't really that much attachment to a party. So I feel this is part of it. But also something else I need to point out is the cost of having another 21 members of parliament nominated, if you must say. It will cost us about 52 million shillings a year if we do decide to give out these seats. That's another addition to the already huge and bloated wage bill that we are dealing with. Remember, we have this fununu referendum. And why? One of the main issues is the fact that we just have too many leaders that we're paying for.
But you see, Yvonne, cost on one hand, but you also have a constitution to implement, a provision to live with.
Absolutely. And the proponents of this then say that it becomes interesting when the issue of cost comes up when you have to fulfill the constitutional requirement on the gender bill. We in fact put up a Senate. We put up an entire new building. We have 67 members who did not exist before. We have constitutional commissions that did not exist before. We have all of these new aspects of the Constitution.
But would it be beautiful, Yvonne?
Democracy
Wouldn't
comes
it
at
be
a
beautiful,
price.
Yvonne, if that conversation was accompanied by perhaps, because you remember, I think it's Article 201 or something that provides for prudent use of the resources.
Yes.
Wouldn't that conversation be complete if it was accompanied by the possibility of reducing the total size of the house? Because then that might be a better conversation. Because if you think about it, we have too many people actually in there.
We don't even know how.
I once met a guy who told me, "Hey, I made it, around Parliament." Then I was thinking, okay, what did you make? Then he said, "Oh, these days I'm a member of Parliament." And I was thinking,
and you had no idea who he was.
I had no idea. Then
but
he
let's
said,
talk
"I'm
about
sorry,
this.
we are like a high school these
Joe,
days."
there's integrity to the laws that we pass, and we seem to have ways around it and explaining it. And granted, there is a conversation that persists at this moment about our bloated wage bill, our bloated legislature. Do we want more? Do we want less? This is the Constitution we have at this moment. Are we ready to implement it? We passed it. But then when we speak, when we speak about a referendum that will come later, will we then change the law again and then to pass certain provisions of that and then have a problem with it, such that we get to the point of reforming the law ad infinitum without saying this is the law that we have right now? Are we ready to live by the provisions of
Linus,
that?
these are legal consequences. Currently, one would argue our parliament is not constitutionally constituted, at least for the National Assembly, because the Senate, it's almost there. At least 21 out of 67
we only need
senators are women. We're almost there. But for the National Assembly, one would argue that we are not, that house is not constitutionally constituted. So in the event this bill fails to make it, and somebody rushes to court, and the court decides to say this assembly, this house is not properly constituted, do we go back to an election then?
Very good question. That's what we will need to be asking on Wednesday when the MPs take the vote. If it doesn't pass, what happens? That is simple. What will happen is someone can rush to court and say these houses are not, the house is not properly constituted. But again, let's look at our context as Kenyans. We are behaving as though Article 81 flew into the Constitution just overnight or recently. It's been there. We passed it in 2010. But there were no major questions about this in 2010. I remember the pre-referendum debate, nothing came up questioning this article. Now it's here with us. We have a problem with it. But that's in line and the nature of our country. We're not a country of laws, especially written things. I think we should have gone the UK route and written laws.
The spirit.
And what becomes of this debate, what becomes of all these ideas, what becomes of that vote, we'll know on Wednesday. Can
I give you a prediction almost?
Yes.
That you require 233 members in the National Assembly on Wednesday.
Yes.
Even before the vote is taken, even before we decide or a decision is made on whether the bill passes or doesn't, you need 233. The finance bill debate raised about 214 members of the National Assembly.
A lot of them were standing outside watching it.
Notwithstanding
so
the
how
intense
many will House?
Less than 200.
Wow. All right.
I get a sense,
we have to really move on because we are running out of time. So we wait and see. But what we don't have to wait and see is the many, many pregnancies that we've seen with students in high schools and even primary schools. And this came out so clearly during the release of the KCPE exams earlier in the week. And the chair of the Kenya National Exam Council, George Magoha, had all kinds of things to say, laying the blame squarely on the parents. Let's hear what he said.
But we have to treat the cause, not the symptom. Stop shouting that we'll give them another exam. Who has told you that we are going to give them another exam? Make sure your children don't get pregnant. What are you talking about?
All right, so where were you when your child was getting pregnant? And that is the overall sentiment that came from there, from the CS Amina Mohammed, from the PS Belio Kipsang, even from Nancy Macharia, from the CEO of the TSC. And Linus, what were you hearing these people saying in all these statements they were making about the pregnant schoolgirls?
I was hearing education authorities saying they can do everything else, They can watch over the exams so that they're not stolen, so that there's no cheating, but they can't watch over your children in terms of pregnancies especially. I was listening to a ministry that is saying, can we go back to the old ways where you take responsibility that probably ends at 8 a.m. when you hand in the kid to the school and resumes at 5 p.m. when they come back home. I think what Magoha triggered there is a values debate, a return to basics debate in this country. What are parents doing? Who is responsible for the upbringing of children? I think that's what I heard.
Jamila, it sounded to me like we are all surprised. Like, oh my, wait a minute, all these girls are pregnant. One, it takes 9 months for a baby to come. At least that's what I see. And then it looks like this is something that has been going on for many years. And your team on the Kiswahili desk did a comprehensive story the other day from Kilifi County. What are some of the things that you're hearing about this trend? Where is it coming from? Why are our girls getting pregnant too early?
In fact, when you say that we were all shocked, it's because of a particular statistic that was given about Kilifi. And they said about 13,000 girls got pregnant in a year. The ages are between 10 and 19. And that was very shocking. So we sent one of our reporters to Kilifi. And one of the things that came out was something they are calling Disco Matanga. And remember when KCP results were being released, Minister Amina spoke about it, and she said she's tired of getting all these clips about the discos. But it's basically young men and young girls, as young as 9 years old, go to these Disco Matangas at night, and there are adults there. And what's amazing is the fact that all this is going on, the young men and the young girls go into the dark, whatever happens behind there we don't know, but they're adults, and no one cares enough to point a finger. And when the ministry says they're shocked by the statistics, I need to tell you that in 2015 there was actually a policy called the National Adolescent Sexual Reproductive Health Policy that was released. It was done by the Ministry of Health. At the time the minister was James Macharia, and one of the issues, one of the main objectives was about teenage pregnancies. And why are we looking shocked?
But I mean, Yvonne, today I watched somebody on TV. There have been so many people talking about this, I don't even remember who it is, but someone said something really interesting, and Jamila talked about young people. And this person was saying a young boy came to her and asked, hey, why is it that you're speaking to all these young girls? Said, no, that there's too many pregnancies and we need to help them out. Right. Then this boy asks, okay, so how many girls can one boy impregnate? Then the lady said, well, you know, if you have 24 hours and I give you 24 girls, those are 24 pregnancies. And he said that then the boys are the weapons of mass destruction. These are the people you need to be dealing with. So do you think that we are focusing our efforts in the right direction from what you can tell from all these conversations, from all the statements, in terms of trying to get a solution with this? Are we talking to the right people?
No. And what are we doing about it? We have another task force. Over and above this report that Jamila has told us about that was way back in 2015. Yes. What is this task force going to tell us? If a girl falls pregnant and the man responsible is over the age of 18, there's a law for that. We know it. It's defilement, it's rape, and Sexual Offences Act should immediately kick in. Now, of course, it gets complicated when it is children who are of the same age. I know there's, talk about taking them to a Boston institution, but that is a whole other matter. But it is not for lack of laws. It is not for lack of lawing. I also find it interesting that the Ministry of Education was itself shocked. These girls have been pregnant for 9 months. If they're giving birth now, surely during the school term, they were in class pregnant. Did a head teacher not say, goodness me, how many students do we have? I mean, yes, the parents and society is to blame, but the ministry can also not now feign shock and surprise at this. These girls were pregnant during the school term, and they had to have known to raise this issue. By some calculations,
they got pregnant in February.
In February, yeah. So surely there must have been, there was what, April for holidays, they came back, there was the second term, there was the entire third term. So between the schools and the parents, it seems to me that we're all shifting blame. So the school says, no, it's up to the parents. The parents are saying no, but they spend all of this time with you. And even the argument of 8 to 5, I know this is a family TV station, but we do know that the act of child baby making does not happen after hours. It can also happen during school hours, 8 to 5. We don't know where these children are. So in a sense, both of them need
Francis,
to be responsible.
you are itching to go, but there's something that I have to push you about, because when I used to look after goats in the village and the goat ran into someone's shamba and destroyed maize, any random adult around there would bang my head and ask me questions. And C.S. Amina seemed to be saying, can we go back to the communal way of raising children? What did you hear there?
Today, try and touch your neighbor's child and you'll see fire.
Yeah.
Why? Because we have left what we thought was ushamba, you know, that way of bringing up children. Now is you, your children, your TV and everything else. But even then, I find it interesting that we are surprised girls are getting pregnant. Pregnancy is not acquired via osmosis. Somebody is responsible for the pregnancies. In fact, the discussion should be who is making the girls pregnant. That's where the focus should be. And I think that's where our focus also, as a newsroom, as a media house, as media generally, that's where our focus should be. Who is making these girls pregnant? Number one. Number two, what action is being taken against these people who are making girls pregnant? Because, I mean, what are you doing with a 10-year-old? What are you doing with a 14-year-old? Something is terribly bad. And even then, we also need to tell our children the correct things.
Comprehensive sex education?
Yes, candidly, because
that is controversial.
At Karuri Primary School, PO Box 35, Karuri, some years ago, Mrs. Mwangi used to tell girls, if you play with boys, you will get pregnant.
Sema kwa Kiswahili.
Ukicheza na vijana utapata mimba. And it used to be as candid as that. Do we still tell them that?
But it's difficult for parents to have that
conversation.
It's a difficult conversation, Linus. It's a difficult conversation for parents to have with their children right now. To sit with 9, 8-year-olds, 10, 11-year-olds to tell them this is the truth. You know, they call it the birds and the bees. Yeah. But you need to sit with them and tell them this.
You can't even use that language anymore. Children know a lot more than we think they do. They have access to the internet. They know.
So before we take a break, Linus, just to the point Yvonne is trying to make, is it that the children have no idea what's going on? They don't know. They don't have the information, or do they have the wrong information?
That's not true. That's not true. When you were being beaten in the village in Siaya, I was getting an equal bashing in Transmara. Now, the generation of kids that we are raising today know so much already. They interact with television. You know very well we interacted with TV as adults for the first time. And they know a lot. This is the era of the social media. They have phones in the house. They already know quite a lot. To me, it goes back to the question of law that Gashuri pointed out earlier. To actually make a schoolgirl pregnant is an offense in law. It's defilement. You can actually go to jail for it. You can be prosecuted for it. So because we're a country of, we need to remind ourselves of enforcement. I think we should have an anti-pregnancies crackdown.
But speaking of crackdowns, that is something we're definitely going to be talking about. We want to take a break. Crackdown against pregnancy? Well, it's not too far-fetched if you consider the fact that we have one episodic crackdown on the Mishuki rules. We'll be right back here on News Gang with more on that. Stay with us.